The barn had not burned on an ordinary night, and everyone in Caldwell, Kansas knew it. They just did not know the whole truth of it. And that distinction was the thing that had kept Dexter Monroe standing at the threshold of that rebuilt structure for 2 solid years, without ever once stepping inside. It was the spring of 1879, and the plains of southern Kansas were caught between a wet winter's last sigh and the dry, relentless ambition of a coming summer. The grass was that particular shade of green that only lasted about 3 weeks before the sun scorched it back to amber, and the cattle trails running through Caldwell were already thick with dust from early drives pushing north from Texas. The town had grown considerably since the cattle trade opened it up. There were 2 saloons now, a telegraph office, a general store with an actual glass window in the front, a church whose steeple still leaned slightly to the east from a windstorm the previous October, and a sheriff who was, by most accounts, doing his reasonable best in a town that frequently tested the limits of what reasonable best could accomplish. Dexter Monroe lived on the edge of all of it. His property sat about 1.5 miles southeast of the main street of Caldwell, a modest cattle operation that had once been more ambitious. He was 31 years old, broad-shouldered in the way that came from actual work rather than vanity, with dark hair that needed cutting by most civilized measures, and eyes the color of creek water in late summer, that particular blend of green and gray that shifted depending on the light and his mood. He had a jaw that looked like it had been cut with intent and hands that were permanently rough no matter how much tallow he worked into them on cold nights. He had come to Kansas from Missouri 8 years ago with his older brother Thomas, 2 horses, a small inheritance from their father that amounted to just enough to be dangerous, and an absolute conviction that they were going to build something worth having. For 6 years they had. The Monroe cattle operation had not been the largest in Sumner County, but it had been solid, dependable, and theirs. They had the main house, 3 good ranch hands, a horse corral, and the barn, a proper, tall, wide-doored barn that Thomas had been especially proud of because he had designed the loft himself to maximize hay storage without compromising the structure's stability. Then came the fire. It was October of 1877, and it had started in the middle of the night. The cause, according to the investigation that followed, was a lantern knocked over by spooked livestock. But Dexter knew what had actually happened, and it lived in him like a coal that never fully cooled. He had left that lantern burning. He had meant to go back and extinguish it. He had gotten distracted by something at the house, a letter he had been trying to write, something ordinary, something that did not matter at all in the long view of things, and he had not gone back. Thomas had. Thomas had gone back to check on the horses, the way he always did before sleeping, because Thomas was thorough and conscientious, and all the things that the older brother in the family was supposed to be. And the lantern had already gone over by then, the dry hay catching in the way that dry hay did, which was instantly and completely, and Thomas Monroe had gotten the horses out, all 4 of them, because he was that kind of man, and he had not gotten himself out. The rebuilt barn stood on the same footprint as the original. The ranch hands, good men who had stayed on out of loyalty and perhaps their own inability to imagine working anywhere else, had constructed it the following spring using timber from a mill outside of Wichita. It was, by any practical measure, a good barn. It was well built. It was functional. The horses were kept there now, the tack, the feed, the implements. Dexter had not set foot inside it since the morning they had pulled Thomas out of the wreckage. He conducted all instructions related to it from outside. He had, over 24 months, developed an elaborate system of communication with his ranch hands Hector Ruiz, who had been with them from the first year, and who never once pressed Dexter about the matter, Pete Dawson, who was younger and occasionally less tactful, but had been educated enough by Hector to keep his observations to himself, and a newer hand named Calvin Webb, who had shown up looking for work the previous spring and who simply had not been around long enough to know the full history. Every morning, Dexter walked to the barn door, He stood at it. He reviewed the day's needs with whoever was inside. He walked away. He had told himself more than once that this was fine, that it was a practical arrangement, that there was no compelling reason why a man needed to enter a specific building when the building's contents could be adequately managed from its doorway. He had almost convinced himself, during some of the longer winter nights, that it was purely a logistical preference. He had not convinced himself at all. The advertisement had been his idea, though he would have been reluctant to admit it to anyone who asked in a particular tone of voice. It had been Hector who had actually suggested it first, planting the seed with the particular subtlety of a man who understood Dexter Monroe better than Dexter Monroe liked to be understood. "You need more help around the main house," Hector had said one evening in February when the ground was frozen and the cattle were hunkered and there was nothing to do but sit near the fire and think about spring. "Not ranch work, housework, cooking, mending, keeping track of supplies. You are letting the domestic side of this operation fall apart." This was true. Dexter was not a bad cook, but he was an inattentive one. The main house had the slightly desperate quality of a place maintained by someone who addressed problems only when they became emergencies. There was a window shutter that had needed rehanging since September. The root cellar had not been properly inventoried in months. He had been eating the same 4 meals on a rotating basis for so long that he had stopped tasting them. "What you are describing," Dexter had said carefully, "is a wife." "I am describing a housekeeper," Hector had replied equally carefully. They had looked at each other for a moment. "Place an advertisement in the Kansas City paper," Hector had said. "Describe the position honestly, see what comes." What came, after 6 weeks and 3 responses that Dexter had found unsuitable for reasons he did not fully examine, was Anna Reed. She arrived on the afternoon stage from Wichita on the 15th of April, 1879, with 2 leather traveling bags, a carpet bag that appeared to contain a small library's worth of books, and an expression of focused composure that Dexter would later recognize as her particular method of managing unfamiliar situations. She looked around at Caldwell's Main Street with the careful attention of someone cataloging information rather than passing judgment, and when she located Dexter standing next to his wagon at the edge of the stage stop, she walked directly toward him without hesitation. She was 26 years old. She was not what Dexter had been picturing, though he would have been hard-pressed to say exactly what he had been picturing. She was medium height, with dark auburn hair pinned up firmly under a traveling hat that had seen better days, and brown eyes that were presently engaged in making a very thorough assessment of him. She wore a practical gray wool traveling dress and sturdy boots that told him she had given thought to the actual conditions she was heading into. Her face was expressive in a way she seemed periodically aware of and periodically unconcerned with, and there was something about the particular set of her chin that suggested she was not someone who was easily deterred once she had made a decision. "Mr. Monroe," she said, not a question. "Miss Reed," he said. "Welcome to Caldwell." "Thank you." She glanced around again briefly. "The stage driver told me the town has been having trouble with cattle thieves operating near the southern border." "Is that likely to affect your operation?" Dexter blinked. He had been preparing a more general welcome. "Not directly," he said. "We run a tighter operation than some of the larger spreads." "Good." She looked at him with that assessing expression again. "I should tell you directly that I came here with the intention of making this work. I am not given to changing my mind once I have committed to a course of action, and I have committed to this one. But I also believe in honest communication, so I will tell you that I have never worked on a cattle ranch before. I have kept house since I was 14 years old for my father and 2 brothers in Ohio, and I managed the domestic accounts for my father's mill for 4 years, so I am not without applicable skills. I am, however, new to this specific context, and I will make mistakes initially." Dexter studied her for a moment. The afternoon light was doing something interesting to her hair where it caught the edge of her hat, turning it closer to copper than auburn. "I appreciate the honesty," he said. "I generally find it saves time," she replied. He loaded her bags into the wagon. She climbed up with no particular expectation of assistance, though he offered it, and they drove the mile and a half out to the property in a silence that was, somewhat to Dexter's surprise, not uncomfortable. The Monroe property in that April light was at its best. The grass was green, the cattle were visible in the middle distance, the house had a solid, purposeful look to it, and the barn stood at the eastern edge of the yard with its new timber sides pale gold in the late afternoon sun. Anna looked at all of it with that same careful inventory expression. She looked at the main house and nodded slightly. She looked at the cattle and nodded again. She looked at the barn. "That looks relatively new," she said. "It was rebuilt," Dexter said. His voice came out even, which he was glad of. She glanced at him. There was something in the quality of her attention that was different from idle curiosity. It was more precise than that, more careful. But she did not press it. "I see," she said simply. He showed her the house, which she examined with the efficient thoroughness of someone already making a mental list. He introduced her to Hector, who greeted her with genuine courtesy, and to Pete and Calvin, who greeted her with varying degrees of self-consciousness. He showed her the room off the back of the house that had served as storage but had been cleared out and made up for her. It was small, but it had a window facing east and a decent iron bedstead. "This is fine," she said. "Then fine, actually, thank you. You are welcome." He paused at the door. "Supper is generally around 6. It has been my own cooking lately, which I will warn you about in advance." She looked at him with something that was almost a smile. "I will take over supper beginning tonight if that is acceptable." "That would be more than acceptable," he said, with perhaps more feeling than he had intended. The almost smile became an actual one, just for a moment, before she turned back to survey her new room. That first week established the rhythms that would carry them through the following weeks. Anna Reed was, as advertised, deeply competent. She reorganized the house with quiet efficiency, identified and addressed problems that Dexter had been ambiently aware of for months without acting on, reinstated the root cellar inventory, produced meals that were notably better than Dexter's rotating 4, and did all of it without either drawing excessive attention to her own competence or making Dexter feel criticized for the state she had found things in. She was also, he discovered, genuinely curious about the cattle operation in a way that went beyond what her position technically required. She asked questions, not intrusive ones, but knowledgeable ones, the kind that suggested she was actually thinking about what she was hearing and building a real understanding of the operation rather than just collecting conversational details. She asked Hector about the spring drives. She asked Pete about the particular challenges of the southern Kansas range versus the ranges he had worked further west. She borrowed Dexter's copy of a cattleman's manual and returned it 3 days later with 3 questions about specific passages. "You do not have to study the cattle business," Dexter told her one evening when she brought the questions to him. They were sitting on the porch after supper, which had become a natural ending to the day, him with coffee, her sometimes with tea, the plains stretching out to the west and the last of the sunlight going amber and rose above them. "I know I do not have to," she said, "but I am here, and it is the context I am operating in, and I find I understand things better when I understand their whole context rather than just my particular piece of it." He thought about that. "What were you doing before this?" he asked. "In Ohio." She was quiet for a moment. "After my father died, my brothers had no particular need for my help running the house. They were both married by then. I was the last unmarried one, which is sometimes how these things go." There was no self-pity in her voice, just the same factual quality she applied to most things. "I spent a year trying to find work locally that I was suited for and finding the options somewhat limited. Then I saw your advertisement. Kansas seemed like a reasonable choice. Kansas seemed like a genuine opportunity," she said, which was a different thing, and they both recognized it as such. The porch became an institution. Not every evening, sometimes work ran late. Sometimes the weather did not cooperate. Sometimes one or the other of them was simply tired in the way that ranch life could tire a person, a full-body tiredness that dropped you into sleep the moment you lay down, but often enough that they both started moving toward it naturally at the end of the working day, and they were both privately aware of that gravitational pull without naming it directly. Dexter told her about Thomas on a Wednesday evening in late April when the frogs were starting up by the creek, and the sky was that deep blue that came just after the last of the visible sunset faded. He had not intended to. He had been talking about the cattle operations history, how they had expanded the herd in the third year, and somehow the sentence came out that Thomas had been particularly good with horses, and then somehow the next sentence was about the fire. He told it plainly. He kept his voice level. He told the part about the lantern, which he had not told anyone except the sheriff at the time, because it mattered to the truth of it even if the official cause had been recorded as accidental. Anna listened without interrupting. This was one of the things he had noticed about her. She listened with her whole attention, not constructing her response while you were still talking but actually receiving what was being said. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You were not careless," she said. "You made a mistake that anyone could have made. What Thomas did when he went back, that was a choice he made. You cannot own that choice as your failure." "I left the lantern," Dexter said. "Yes," she said, "and you will carry that. I am not suggesting you should not. But carrying it and being the cause of what happened to him are two different things, and I think you may have blurred those two things together until they feel like the same one." He looked at her. She was looking out at the darkening plains, her profile clear against the last of the light, her expression thoughtful and honest. "You are a plain-spoken woman, Miss Reed," he said. "I prefer it," she said. "I find it is kinder in the long run, even when it is harder in the short one." He nodded slowly. He did not argue with her assessment, because he suspected she was right, but neither did he feel the weight of it lift immediately the way people sometimes seem to expect grief and guilt to lift when spoken to directly. The weight was still there. It was just that, for the first time since October of 1877, he felt like someone was standing next to him while he carried it. May came in with warm wind and longer days, and the first of the summer cattle drives beginning to move through the Caldwell area. The town's main street got busy with cowboys and drovers, and the particular commerce that followed cattle north. Not all of it respectable, but Dexter had long since made a kind of peace with the town's dual nature. He went in for supplies on Saturdays, usually, and Anna came with him starting in the third week, because she had taken over the household supply management and needed to develop her own relationships with the merchants. She made friends in Caldwell with a naturalness that Dexter admired and that he personally did not possess. Within a month of her arrival, she knew the telegraph operator by name, had a standing conversation with the woman who ran the dry goods counter at the general store, and had been invited to 2 Sunday gatherings at the church, which was not a strictly religious institution so much as a social one. The actual theological content varied considerably depending on which traveling minister happened to be passing through. Dexter was not, by nature, a man who spent much time in town beyond necessity. He was aware that there was talk about Anna's presence at his ranch. There was always talk about anything in a town the size of Caldwell, and he found that he minded less than he might have expected, partly because the talk seemed to be largely benign, and partly because he was becoming increasingly aware that the thing between himself and Anna Reed was developing a weight and warmth that had nothing to do with what anyone else thought about it. She had started sitting closer to him on the porch. Not dramatically closer, just the natural small drift that happened when two people had been sharing a space regularly for a month, and the initial careful distance no longer felt necessary. He was aware of it the way you became aware of a fire's heat, not the blaze of it but the comfortable warmth at the right distance. She laughed at things he said. Not politely. She was too direct for polite laughter, but genuinely, with the particular surprise of someone who had not expected to find something as funny as they did. He had started to notice what made her laugh and to find himself constructing observations with that end in mind, which was a thing he had not done with anyone in a considerable amount of time. He had also started to notice other things. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair back behind her ear when she was concentrating. The way she read with the book held close, her whole upper body slightly inclined toward it, as though she wanted to get as near the words as possible. The fact that she made 2 cups of coffee in the mornings now, one for herself and one she left on the table for him, timed with such accuracy that it was still hot when he came in from the first round of morning checks. Whether this was conscientiousness or something more intentional, he had not determined. He realized on a Tuesday morning in the middle of May, while watching her hang washing in the side yard with the ease and practicality of someone entirely at home in the place she occupied, doing an extremely poor job of not falling in love with Anna Reed. The realization did not alarm him as much as he might have expected. It settled, rather, like a fact he had been moving toward for some time and had finally arrived at. The question, which was considerably more complicated, was what to do with the fact. He was her employer. She had come here for a specific position, a professional arrangement, and he felt keenly the weight of that context. She had laid out her situation in Ohio honestly on the first day. The brothers who were married, the limited options, the genuine opportunity she had come here seeking. He could not know whether what he was feeling was mutual, and the possibility of being wrong, of making her position here untenable, of misreading something that was simply warmth and practical engagement for something more personal, kept him careful. He was still being careful on the morning of the 23rd of May when everything shifted. He was at the barn door at 7 in the morning, running through the day's work list with Calvin, who was inside cleaning tack and whose replies came from somewhere in the interior's dimness. The morning was clear and smelled of grass, and the particular clean earth smell that came after a light rain the previous night. The barn door was open, as it always was when the hands were working inside. Dexter was standing where he always stood, at the threshold, his boot toe perhaps 2 inches from the point where the outside ground became the interior floor, which was the boundary he had been maintaining for 2 years without examining it too carefully. He was describing the fence section that needed checking on the eastern pasture when Anna came around the corner of the house carrying a bucket of kitchen scraps toward the composting area. She glanced at him, glanced at the barn, and shifted her path slightly. "Calvin," she called into the barn's interior, "do you know where Hector keeps the leather oil? The bridle in the front hall has dried out, and I thought I might address it while I have a moment." Calvin's voice came back from inside. "Yes, ma'am, it is on the second shelf left of the door. Come on in." Anna looked at Dexter. There was a brief moment. She read something in his face. He was nearly certain of it, the way she read most things, with that quiet precision, and then she looked back at the open barn door. She walked through it first. She did not make a performance of it. She did not look back at him. She simply walked through the door in the natural way of someone going in to retrieve something, and her footsteps went across the floor inside, and Calvin's voice moved to help her find the shelf. Dexter stood at the threshold. His heart was doing something large and complicated in his chest. The morning light fell through the open door, and he could see the interior, the stalls, the packed earth floor, the hay in the loft, the good smell of horses and leather and feed that was the smell of every barn he had ever known. It was just a barn. It was a rebuilt barn on the same ground where his brother had died, and it was just a barn, and Anna Reed had walked through the door with the quiet naturalness of someone who understood that a threshold was only as permanent as the person standing at it chose to make it. He took a breath. He stepped through the door. The floor was solid under his boots. The barn smelled exactly the way barns smelled, not of smoke, not of burning, not of the particular terrible smell of October 1877. It smelled of horses and hay and oil in the morning. The light came in through 2 high windows and the open door and lay in warm bars across the floor. Calvin looked up from the tack he had been cleaning, registered something on Dexter's face, and had the good grace to focus immediately back on his work. Anna was at the shelf to the left of the door. She found the leather oil, turned, and saw him standing inside the barn. She looked at him for a moment, and her expression was something he had not quite seen from her before. It was soft and knowing, and full of a warmth that was not professional or polite or any of the calibrated things that had made up the early weeks of their acquaintance. It was just her, looking at him, understanding exactly what had just happened. "The bridle is in terrible shape," she said. Her voice was quiet and ordinary and kind. "You can bring it out here to work on if the light is better," he said. "The light is fine in the house," she said, "but thank you." She walked back out past him, her shoulder almost brushing his arm in the narrow door space, and was gone back toward the house with the leather oil, and whatever she knew about him now, which he suspected was quite a lot. He stood in the barn for another minute. He walked to the nearest stall, where the gray gelding he called River pressed his nose against the rails in greeting. Dexter put his hand against the horse's nose and felt the warm breath on his palm and stood there in the place where his brother had been, in the rebuilt version of the place where his brother had been, and let the grief be what it was, grief, not guilt, not the permanent unpayable debt he had been treating it as, but the ordinary terrible honest grief of losing someone you loved. After a while, he walked back out into the morning and finished the conversation with Calvin about the fence line. At supper that evening, Anna had made a proper beef stew with the dried herbs she had organized into labeled jars on the kitchen shelf and bread that she had been perfecting over the previous 3 weeks. Hector and Pete and Calvin ate with them at the big table. As was the custom on Monroe property, Thomas had instituted it in the first year, and Dexter had maintained it as a matter of both practicality and the kind of loyalty that outlasted its origin. After supper, when the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and the dishes were cleared, Dexter poured 2 cups of coffee and set one at Anna's place at the table without her having to ask, and sat down across from her. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked up from the mending she had picked up, her needle pausing. "I have not been in that barn in 2 years," he said, "since the night of the fire." "I know," she said. "Hector mentioned it. Not unkindly, he was explaining the arrangement for how to communicate with the hands about barn work. You knew this morning." "Yes," she said. "I thought—" She stopped. She looked at her mending for a moment and then back at him, and there was that quality again, the careful honesty that he had come to think of as one of her defining features. "I thought that sometimes a threshold is easier to cross when someone goes first. That it is not weakness to let someone go ahead of you, that Thomas would likely not want you standing outside the place where his horses lived for the rest of your natural life." Dexter was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the Kansas night had settled in, the frogs were going, the wind was low, and in the distance a coyote added its voice to the general conversation of the dark. "He would have hated it," he said finally. "Thomas was very practical. He would have found the whole arrangement deeply inefficient." Anna smiled. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I knew," Dexter said. "I am still working on deserving having known him." "That is not how grief works," she said, gently but without softness, patting the truth of it. "The people we lose do not require us to spend the rest of our lives in diminishment. If he loved you, and everything you have told me suggests he did, then what he would want is for you to live." "Is that from a book?" Dexter asked, because sometimes she deployed wisdom with the precision of someone who had read it somewhere and recognized it as true. "From my mother," she said, "when my father died. She said it to me, and I have been trying to believe it since." She paused. "I am further along in the believing than you are, I think, but I got there gradually." He looked at her across the table, the auburn hair in the lamplight, the brown eyes that were the most honest thing he had encountered in a considerable number of years, the capable hands that had just set down their mending and were now resting open on the table, unself-conscious. "Anna," he said, and the use of her first name, which he had not used before, which neither of them had crossed into yet, landed between them with a quiet significance. She did not flinch from it. She met his eyes. "You have been very good for this place," he said. "More than I advertised for. I want you to know that I am aware of it." "You have been a fair and generous employer," she said carefully. "I am trying to say something that is not exactly about that arrangement," he said. Her expression shifted, not surprised exactly, but arrived at, as though she had been waiting with patience to see which path the conversation would take and had now found out. "I know," she said. The word hung between them. Not yes, not no, not a definitive anything, but a confirmation that they were both standing in the same place, both looking at the same thing, both aware of what it was. "I do not want to make your position here difficult," he said. "I want to be clear about that. This situation we have now, it is yours regardless of what else happens or does not happen. You are not at risk of losing it based on whatever you say next." She studied him for a long moment. "You are a more careful man than you present yourself as," she said, which was not what he had expected her to say, and which made him feel seen in a way that was simultaneously uncomfortable and something like relief. "I have had cause to be," he said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I did not come to Kansas looking for a husband," she said. "I want to be honest about that because I think it is relevant. I came looking for a position and a genuine opportunity and a place where I could be useful and independent, and I have found all of those things." "Understood," he said, and meant it, and also felt the particular quality of a sentence that has not yet ended. "I also," she continued, looking at him with that clear, steady gaze, "did not expect to find someone like you. And I find that what has happened over these weeks, what I feel when we are talking on the porch in the evening, or when you say something that makes me think about it for the rest of the day, or when I made that second cup of coffee this morning without deciding to, I find that I am no longer certain that independence and the other thing are as incompatible as I once believed they might be." Dexter absorbed this. Outside, the coyote was quiet now. "I think that is the most careful yes I have ever heard," he said. She laughed, that genuine surprised laugh that he had been working to provoke for weeks, and shook her head. "I think you are right," she said. "So let me be more direct. I have feelings for you, Dexter Monroe, and I have had them for some time, and if you would like to do something about that, I would not object." He stood up from the table, walked around it, and offered her his hand the way he had not offered it at the stage stop, not as practical assistance but as an invitation. She looked at it for a moment, then put her hand in his and stood up. He was taller than her by a considerable amount, which he noticed now in a way that was new and warm. She was looking up at him with those honest brown eyes and not a trace of uncertainty, just that clear, composed attention that was, he had come to understand, her version of courage. He kissed her in the lamplight of his kitchen, slowly and with intention, and she kissed him back with the directness that characterized everything she did, and the frogs went on in the dark outside, and the Kansas night was warm and full of the smell of new grass and the promise of summer. The following weeks had a different quality, not dramatically different on the surface, because they were both people who moved carefully, and because the situation warranted that carefulness, but different in the way that a room feels different when you have finally acknowledged what was always in it. The porch evenings were longer. The conversations covered more ground. There was, occasionally, the touch of hands that was not accidental. Hector, who noticed everything and said only what was required, said nothing specific, but began leaving the porch area to the two of them in the evenings with an efficiency that suggested planning. Pete Dawson made one comment in early June that earned him a look from Hector that apparently carried sufficient weight, because no further comments followed. Calvin, who was 20 and from Indiana and still sorting out the basic mechanics of living in Kansas, seemed genuinely uncertain whether anything was happening, and resolved the uncertainty by focusing exclusively on his work. Dexter had begun going into the barn every morning. Not making a point of it, not announcing it, not treating it as an achievement. Just going in, the way you went into any building you needed to go into, to do the work of the day. The first few times the weight of it was considerable, the particular heaviness of a place that held history. By the second week, it was only sometimes heavy. By the end of June, it was a barn. It was the barn where his horses were, and where the tack hung, and where the hay was stored for winter, and it was also the place where his brother had died, and both of those things were true simultaneously without canceling each other out. He told this to Anna one evening when she asked how he was finding the mornings, and she nodded with the expression she wore when something confirmed a theory she had been developing. "That is how it works, I think," she said. "The grief does not go away. It just stops being the only thing." "You were right," he said. "About Thomas, he would have hated the arrangement I had made." "I had a sense he would," she said, smiling. "He would also have liked you," Dexter said, "considerably. He had a great appreciation for plain speaking. He was not always surrounded by enough of it." "Were you?" she asked. "No," he admitted. "I was better at the plain speaking than at receiving it. I am working on the second part." She squeezed his hand, which was in hers on the porch rail, and they stayed like that for a while, watching the western sky turn through its colors. In June, a difficulty presented itself in the form of a man named Gerald Pitts, who ran a mid-sized cattle operation 8 miles north of Caldwell, and who had apparently decided that several sections of the fence line between his property and Dexter's was incorrectly placed in Dexter's favor. This was not a new claim. Pitts had raised it the previous year and been referred to the county land records, which had not resolved things to his satisfaction. But in June of 1879, he raised it again with more volume, appearing at the Monroe property on a Thursday afternoon with 2 of his men and a great deal of righteousness. Anna had been in the yard when they arrived, which was something Pitts had apparently not accounted for in whatever version of this conversation he had prepared. He addressed himself to Dexter, who came out of the house at the sound of horses, but Anna had positioned herself near the proceedings in a way that was entirely natural and also meant she heard everything. The conversation was not pleasant. Pitts was the variety of man who believed that speaking loudly and with confidence was a reasonable substitute for having a correct position. He made claims about the fence line that the land records did not support. He made a series of implications about the Monroe operations general management that were designed to needle rather than to inform. He ended with a veiled threat about what happened when a man did not address his neighbor's reasonable concerns. Dexter handled it with a level patience that Anna could see was costing him something, his jaw set and his voice controlled. When Pitts was done, Dexter said, "I suggest you review the county records again. The fence is where the survey places it. If you believe the survey is wrong, you are welcome to have it conducted again at your expense, and I will abide by whatever it finds." Pitts was preparing another volley when Anna said, pleasantly and clearly, "Mr. Pitts, I believe the Sumner County Land Office opens at 9 in the morning. The records supervisor there is a Mr. Halliday, and he is very thorough. I would be happy to accompany you there if you would like assistance navigating the file system." There was a brief silence. Pitts looked at her. "Who are you?" "Anna Reed," she said. "I manage the accounts and household operation for Mr. Monroe's property." The way she said it, with complete simplicity and no defensiveness whatsoever, left Pitts without an obvious line of attack. He looked at Dexter. "This is not finished," he said. "I expect the land records will finish it," Dexter replied. Pitts and his men rode away. Dexter turned to look at Anna. "Thank you," he said. "I find that offering a practical path forward deflates a certain kind of argument," she said. "Men who are operating on anger rather than actual grievance generally do not want the practical path. They want the argument. Removing the argument is more efficient than winning it." Dexter looked at her for a moment. "Did your father teach you that?" "My mother," she said. "The land records visit did in fact occur." Dexter went with the county surveyor the following week, and the fence was confirmed to be correctly placed, and Pitts had the grace to not raise the matter again for the rest of the summer, which was as much resolution as anyone was likely to get. July arrived with the full weight of a Kansas summer, which was considerable. The heat came down on the plains like something with intent, and the cattle operation shifted into its summer rhythms: earlier mornings, midday pauses when the heat peaked, long evenings watching the horizon for the weather that could change in 20 minutes this time of year. It was in July that Dexter took Anna out to see the eastern section of the property, which was the part he liked best, a creek bend where the cottonwoods grew thick and the water was cold and clear from underground springs, and where Thomas had always said he would build a second house someday when they could afford it. It was a quiet place and beautiful in the particular way that Kansas could be beautiful when you stopped fighting the landscape and let it be what it was. They rode out on a Saturday afternoon, Anna on the bay mare that had turned out to suit her, which Dexter had been quietly pleased about. She had taken to riding the way she took to most things, with focused attention and a willingness to acknowledge what she did not know. At the creek bend, they tied the horses and sat in the shade of the cottonwoods with the water going over the stones and the heat eased by the moisture and the shade. Thomas wanted to build here, Dexter said. Anna looked around at the cottonwoods, the bend in the creek, the way the light came through the leaves in that dappled, shifting way. "I can understand that," she said. He had a whole plan for it, a smaller house, a separate garden. He had a way of imagining things very specifically. He could describe exactly what a thing would look like before it existed, which I never could do. I am better with what is already there. "That sounds like a useful combination," she said. "One person to imagine the thing and one to build it." He was better at the imagining. I was generally better at the building. She looked at him. "Is that still true, the building part?" "I think so." He met her gaze. "I think I have been building toward something for the past few months, slowly but deliberately." "I have noticed," she said quietly. "I want to ask you something," he said. He had been working up to this for a while, not because he was uncertain of what he wanted, but because he had wanted to do it right in the right place at the right time, and this place, Thomas's place, the creek bend with the cottonwoods, felt right in a way that was both bittersweet and entirely appropriate. She was looking at him with that clear attention, waiting. "I am not a simple man," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I carry things. I have made mistakes that cost more than I can repay. I am better than I was at letting the people around me in, but I will likely need to be reminded of that occasionally. The ranch is a good operation, but it is not large, and Kansas is not Ohio, and the life I am offering is a specific and sometimes demanding one. I am aware of all of this," she said. "I am also," he stopped, tried again. "You have changed the quality of everything here. Not just the house, not just the meals and the organized root cellar and the bridle that is no longer dried out, but the quality of the days, the quality of the evenings. I am a better version of this particular man when you are here, and I do not say that lightly or without having thought about it for some time." Her eyes were bright. She was not crying, she was not, he had come to understand, someone who cried easily, but there was something in her expression that was moved, genuinely moved. "Anna Reed," he said, "would you do me the considerable honor of marrying me?" She breathed in. The creek went on. The cottonwood leaves moved. "Yes," she said, simply, directly, the way she did everything. "Yes, I would." He had a ring. He had gone to the jeweler in Wichita on the pretense of a supply run 2 weeks earlier, and had chosen it with more attention than he typically gave to purchases. It was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, not extravagant, but chosen because the deep blue of the stone had made him think of the color the sky went at dusk over the Kansas plains, which was a color he associated with the porch and the evenings and her. He put it on her finger, and she held her hand out in the dappled cottonwood light and looked at it for a moment with an expression that was equal parts wonder and satisfaction. "It is beautiful," she said. "You chose well." "I had to get it right," he said. "You have a very good eye, and I did not want to present you with something that would fail your assessment." She laughed, startled, and leaned toward him, and he kissed her there in the cottonwood shade by the creek where Thomas had imagined building something, and the afternoon settled warm and complete around them. They married in September of 1879, at the Caldwell church on a Saturday when the summer's worst heat had passed, and the mornings were starting to carry the first faint edge of fall. The ceremony was conducted by a minister who had the fortunate characteristic of being both sincere and brief, and attended by Hector, Pete, and Calvin, the couple who ran the general store and had become particular friends of Anna's, the telegraph operator and his wife, several neighboring ranchers who had come to have a good opinion of both Dexter and Anna independently, and a total of 22 other Caldwell residents who had decided this was worth attending. Anna wore a dress she had ordered from a dressmaker in Wichita, ivory cotton lawn with a small pattern of leaves, not the extravagant production that some wedding dresses in the catalogs achieved, but a dress that suited her perfectly, that was elegant in the quiet way she herself was elegant without requiring a great deal of scaffolding to get there. Dexter wore the good suit he had purchased in anticipation of exactly this kind of occasion, and had been waiting for an occasion worthy of it. When he saw her come in from the back of the church, simple as it was, just 4 rows of wooden chairs and a lectern and the slightly crooked steeple overhead, he felt something in his chest open up like a window in a stuffy room, the kind of feeling that was almost shocking in its cleanness. She came down the aisle between the chairs with her chin up and her eyes on him, and the expression that was, underneath its composure, incandescent. Hector, standing at Dexter's shoulder, said very quietly, "You did something right." "I know," Dexter said. The vows were the traditional ones, spoken plainly and meant entirely. When the minister pronounced them married, Dexter kissed his wife in front of 26 people in the Caldwell church, and she kissed him back without the slightest concern for the audience, which was, he would tell her later, the most characteristically her moment of the entire day. The celebration afterward was held at the Monroe property, the yard cleared and lanterns strung and tables brought out from the house. Anna had organized the food with the help of 3 neighboring women who had offered, and who she had organized with the efficiency she brought to everything. There was fiddle music from Pete Dawson, who turned out to have a previously undisclosed talent for it, and dancing that started formally and became considerably less so as the evening went on. Hector danced with Anna once, very correctly, and then said something to her that made her laugh her best laugh. And Dexter, watching from across the yard with a glass of cider, felt an emotion he could not entirely name, something composed in equal parts of gratitude, and the warm recognition of having arrived somewhere he had not been certain he would ever reach. Later, after the guests had gone and the yard was quiet and the ranch hands had turned in for the night, Dexter and Anna sat on the porch together in the September dark, and the stars were extraordinary in the way they could be in Kansas, which was completely unobstructed by anything between you and the sky. "Well," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Well," he agreed. "That was a very good day," she said. "It was," he said, "the best I can remember." She was quiet for a moment. "Dexter." "Yes." "I want to tell you something that I have been thinking about." "All right." "When I came here in April, I told myself I was coming for the position, the practical opportunity. And that was true. I was being honest when I said it." She paused. "But I also think that somewhere underneath it I was hoping for something more, and I was afraid to say so because hoping for things and not getting them is a particular kind of painful, and I had gotten into the habit of being careful about what I hoped for." He was listening. He would always listen when she talked. He had already understood this about himself. "And what I want to tell you," she said, "is that what I got was more than what I was hoping for, more than I was being careful enough to hope for." She looked up at him in the dark. "I just wanted you to know that." He pressed his lips to the top of her head, where her hair was still partly up from the ceremony, a few strands coming loose now in the natural way of the end of a long day. "I want you to know," he said, "that you walking through that barn door was the bravest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." She was quiet, receiving this. "I did not know it would mean what it did," she said. "I just thought you needed someone to go first." "You were right," he said. "I just needed someone to go first." They sat in the September dark, and the stars wheeled over Kansas, and the night was full of the sounds of the prairie, and it was, by every available measure, a perfect evening. The first full year of their marriage settled into something that Dexter had not known how to imagine, but recognized immediately as what he had been working toward. A life with actual weight and warmth in it. A life populated by two people who were genuinely suited to each other in the particular way that had less to do with similarity than with complementarity. He was steady where she was quick. She was precise where he was instinctive. They were both direct, both capable, both possessed of a deep attachment to honesty that had, by the end of the first year, produced a marriage of remarkable transparency and very few unspoken resentments. Anna continued to develop the household operation with a kind of quiet ambition that Dexter found both admirable and occasionally surprising. By the end of 1879, she had reorganized the ranch accounts in a way that identified 3 areas of unnecessary expenditure and 2 areas where investment would pay for itself within 2 seasons. She presented this to Dexter with the straightforward manner of someone who had done work and was reporting its results, and he had sat with it for an evening and come back with 3 questions and an observation, and they had worked through the implications together, and the resulting adjustments had materially improved the operation's footing going into 1880. "You would have made an excellent business partner in any enterprise," he told her one evening after one of these working sessions. "I am your business partner in this one," she said simply. "Yes," he said, "you are," and he meant it in every sense. Hector left in the spring of 1880, not because anything was wrong, but because he had a sister in New Mexico he had been talking about visiting for 3 years. And the conversation he had with Dexter before leaving was one of the more significant conversations Dexter could remember having Hector saying, in the careful roundabout way that was his particular form of directness, that the Monroe property was in the best state it had been in since before the fire, and that Thomas would have been pleased. And that he, Hector, was glad to have stayed long enough to see it. They shook hands for a long time. A new hand came on that spring, a man named Samuel Cross, 34, who had come up from Texas with excellent references and a calm efficiency that integrated well with Pete and Calvin. He and Anna established a working relationship almost immediately, partly because Samuel was the kind of man who recognized competent authority regardless of its form and gave it appropriate respect. On the 2nd of January, 1881, Anna told Dexter she was expecting their first child. She told him in the kitchen in the morning, the way she told him most things, directly, clearly, watching his face with that particular attention she reserved for moments she knew were significant. His reaction was not immediate words. He stood for a moment in the kitchen doorway with the January cold still on him from the early check, and the lamp on the table casting its yellow light over her face and the whole thing, the kitchen, the morning, her felt very still and very large. Then he crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and put his arms around her and held her with the particular care of someone holding something that contains the whole of what matters to them. And she put her forehead against his shoulder, and they stayed like that for a long moment while the Kansas winter moved against the windows. "Are you well?" he said into her hair. "Entirely," she said. "I am strong as a horse and I intend to conduct myself accordingly. Do not let the situation become an occasion for excessive worry," he laughed against her hair. "I make no promises." She pulled back and looked at him. "Dexter, I am going to be fine." "I know," he said. He touched her face. "I know." The pregnancy proceeded as she had promised it would, without drama and without significant difficulty, because Anna had told it that it would proceed this way, and things, generally, did what Anna told them to do. She made certain adjustments to her daily activities as the months went on, none of which she described as limitations, all of which she described as practical reconfigurations. She continued to manage the accounts. She continued to participate in the Saturday trips to town. She did eventually allow that the heavier lifting was something she would leave to Pete and Calvin without particular injury to her self-concept, which Dexter received as a significant concession. He was anxious in the way that a man who has lost people he loved is anxious when someone he loves is engaged in a process with inherent risk. He did not express this anxiety in any dramatic way. He had learned enough about himself and about her to know that performing anxiety served neither of them. But he was aware of it, a background hum that he managed by staying useful. He built the cradle himself. He spent 3 weeks on it in the evenings, in the barn, working by lamplight when the day's main work was done. He had not been a particularly skilled woodworker before, but he had Thomas's old tools and a manual Pete had located at a used goods dealer in Wichita, and what he lacked in native talent he made up for in care and iteration. The cradle that emerged was not fancy, but it was solid and it was smooth, and it was made with the concentrated attention of someone who was not interested in it being anything less than exactly right. Anna ran her hand over it when he brought it in, and her expression was the one she reserved for the things that moved her most deeply, composed on the surface, with something very warm just underneath. "Thomas's tools?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She nodded. "It is beautiful," she said. "He would have made it with more flourishes, but I think yours will last longer." He absolutely would have made it with more flourishes, Dexter agreed, and they both smiled with the particular quality of people sharing a grief that has become, over time, also a kind of comfort. Their son was born on the 15th of September, 1881, in the room that had been Anna's when she first arrived, and that had since been converted to their actual bedroom. The birth was attended by the town doctor, who had come out from Caldwell at dawn, and a neighboring woman named Clara Hollies, who had 3 children of her own and was, Anna had noted early in their acquaintance, the most practically useful person in the immediate county. Dexter had remained in the kitchen for the hours of the process, which was where Clara firmly placed him after his 3rd appearance at the bedroom door, with offers of assistance that she did not require. He sat at the kitchen table and drank more coffee than was advisable and listened and thought about every possible thing, and thought about Thomas, who would have been the kind of uncle who taught a child everything Dexter considered impractical and who would have been entirely indispensable. When the baby's first voice reached him from behind the closed door, he had to put his hands flat on the table for a moment and simply breathe. Clara came out with a look of uncomplicated satisfaction and said, "A boy. Both perfectly well, you can go in." Anna was propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted in the way of someone who has done an enormous amount of work very recently and is resting on the other side of it. The baby was in her arms, very new, very small, with the particular complete perfection of new things. Dexter sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his wife and his son and felt something that did not have a word in any language. He had access to a fullness, a stillness, a sense of having arrived somewhere that everything before had been pointing toward. "He is healthy?" he asked. "Perfectly," Anna said. Her voice was tired, but it was her voice, entirely her. "Come and look at him properly." He looked at the baby, who was asleep with the thoroughness that new babies slept, his small face entirely resolved and untroubled. "Thomas," Dexter said. It was not a question exactly. Anna looked at him. "I was hoping you would say that," she said quietly. "Thomas Monroe," he said, "if that is all right with you." "It is more than all right," she said. "It is right." He kissed her forehead, then the baby's, in the September afternoon of their Kansas bedroom, with the cradle waiting in the corner, and the planes going on in every direction outside the window. Thomas Monroe grew into his name with a thoroughness that Dexter found both moving and occasionally uncanny. By the time he was 2, he had the same quality of intense specific imagination that his namesake had possessed. He could describe in elaborate detail exactly what he intended to build before he built it, using blocks or mud or whatever material was available. He had Anna's eyes and Dexter's general physical build, and his own particular quality of enthusiastic engagement with everything he encountered. Anna was an extraordinary mother. This did not surprise Dexter, because she was extraordinary at everything she brought her full attention to, and she brought her full attention to this. She was warm but not indulgent, consistent but not rigid, and she talked to Thomas with the same honest directness she talked to everyone, which produced, by age 3, a child who asked questions with startling precision and expected actual answers. In the spring of 1883, Anna became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy arrived with more difficulty. A rough first few months that she navigated with her characteristic practical approach, but that Dexter found more frightening than he was comfortable admitting. The doctor came out twice during that spring with a thorough assessment and said that everything was progressing as it should and that Anna should rest more than she was resting, a recommendation she treated as a guideline rather than an instruction until Dexter and Clara Hollis together made a fairly compelling case for taking it more seriously. She rested more. The summer was easier. The fall arrived, and with it, in October of 1883, a daughter. Dexter was better prepared this time for the experience of waiting in the kitchen, though not entirely comfortable with it. When Clara came out with the same satisfied expression and said, "A girl." Both well, he was on his feet before she finished the sentence. The girl was darker in coloring than Thomas had been. She had Anna's auburn tint to her hair, even at 3 hours old, and Dexter's creekwater eyes, and she made her opinion of the world known from the first moment in a way that Clara, with great amusement, described as spirited. "She is going to have an opinion about everything," Clara said. "She comes by it honestly," Dexter said, which made Anna laugh from the bed, which was the best sound he had heard in a considerable number of months. They named her Clara Rose Monroe Clara for their neighbor and friend who had attended both births and who had been a consistent and generous presence in their lives, and Rose because it had been Thomas's favorite flower, and because Anna had maintained a small rose bed at the eastern side of the house that bloomed every June with a reliability that felt like testimony. The Monroe property in the middle of the 1880s was a good place to be. The cattle operation had continued to develop along the lines that Anna's account work had suggested, and by 1884 they had expanded the herd to a size that required an additional ranch hand and a second corral. The house had gained a room on the eastern side, built by Dexter and Samuel Cross over the course of a fall, with Pete and Calvin assisting on the structural days, which gave Thomas his own room and the adults considerably more space. The barn had become, entirely, just the barn. Dexter went in and out of it every day with the same lack of ceremony with which he went in and out of any other building on the property. The grief for Thomas, for his brother, for the man whose name his son now carried, had not disappeared, but had taken the form that Anna had described from the beginning. It had become something that existed alongside everything else, part of the full and populated texture of his daily life, rather than the negative space that organized everything around it. He told her this one evening in the summer of 1884, on the porch, which remained their institution, the place where the day ended, and the two of them resumed the ongoing conversation that was the interior life of their marriage. The children were in bed. The fireflies were out over the grass, which Anna had been delighted to discover the first summer she spent in Kansas and had never entirely gotten over. "It happened gradually," he said, "the way you said it would." "Most things do," she said, "the ones worth waiting for." "You were right about almost everything," he said, "right from the start." "Almost everything," she noted. "The fence situation with Pitts," he said. "You told me he would raise it a third time and he has not." "I said might raise it a third time, and the summer is not over." He smiled. She smiled back. The fireflies drifted over the grass, and the June night was warm and full of sound, and they were sitting exactly as they had been sitting since April of 1879, close together on the porch of the house that had once been just his and was now entirely theirs, and it was the most ordinary thing in the world and the best thing he could imagine. In the August of that same year, Dexter did the thing he had been thinking about since the afternoon at the creek bend in 1879. He began building at the Cottonwood place. Not a second house, not yet, but the foundation of something. A proper fishing structure by the water, a covered area where the family could spend summer afternoons away from the direct heat of the open yard. It was a small project by ranch standards, but he went out on Sunday afternoons with Thomas, who was now nearly 3 and had very detailed opinions about the correct placement of every component, and they worked at it together in the cottonwood shade. Anna came sometimes, with Clara on her hip, and watched the two of them argue companionably about construction logistics, with an expression that Dexter caught once when she did not know he was looking pure, unguarded joy, the kind that was too real to perform for anyone. Thomas, the brother, the memory of the brother, would have been out there every Sunday. Dexter knew this, and it was no longer a wound but a fact he could hold without it holding him. One afternoon in the fall of 1885, when the Cottonwood project had become a genuine small pavilion with a bench and a roof that kept the afternoon sun off adequately, Dexter took Anna out there alone, while Clara Hollies kindly kept the children for an hour. They sat on the bench by the creek with the leaves turning above them and the water cold and clear over the stones. "I want to tell you something," he said, which was how significant conversations between them had always tended to begin. She looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "All right. When I was standing at that barn door," he said, "the morning you went in ahead of me, I did not know what would happen if I went in. I genuinely did not know if I could. I had been standing at that door for 2 years telling myself it was practical, and all the while I knew it was not practical. It was that I was afraid. Afraid of the grief, afraid of the guilt, afraid of what it felt like to stand in the place where everything changed." She was listening with her full attention. "And you walked through it," he said, "not as a statement, not making a point. Just walked through it the way you walk through everything, like the door was just a door and the thing inside was just a thing inside and you were going in to get the leather oil." He paused. "It was the most useful thing anyone has ever done for me." Her hand found his on the bench. "You were ready," she said. "That morning I could see it. You just needed the door to be less significant for one moment." "I needed you," he said. "That is what I needed." She was quiet for a moment. The creek went on. A blue heron stood on a stone downstream, entirely still, watching the water with the patience of its kind. "I need you too," she said. "I am aware that I do not always appear to need anyone very much, because I am self-sufficient by habit and by preference. But I want you to know that what you are to me, what this is," she gestured, a gesture that took in the creek and the cottonwoods and the ranch and the children and all of it. "I did not know to hope for this. I am glad I was wrong about the limits of what was possible." He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to the back of it, an old-fashioned gesture he had never been prone to with anyone else and was entirely natural with her. "So am I," he said. They sat in the October afternoon by the creek where Thomas Monroe had planned to build something, and Dexter had built something, and it was everything. The years continued, as years in that place and time did with work and weather, and the daily negotiations of a cattle operation's seasonal demands, with the children growing into their particular characters, Thomas becoming more like his namesake with every year in the precision of his imagination and the quality of his consideration, Clara Rose becoming something of her own devising, which appeared to be a combination of Anna's directness and Dexter's steadiness, with an entirely original overlay of pure self-determined curiosity about everything the world contained. Pete Dawson married a woman from Caldwell named Edith in 1886, and they stayed on, Edith becoming friends with Anna in the immediate way of two people who recognize each other as competent and interesting. Samuel Cross continued to be the best ranch hand on the property and showed no interest in leaving. Calvin Webb, grown now into a capable young man of 27, met a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and spent a winter being shy about it before Anna, at the end of her patience with his indirect approach, told him plainly that the young woman in question was waiting for him to ask her to ride out, and he should simply do that, which he did. And it worked. Dexter turned 38 in the spring of 1886, which was not a milestone birthday by most reckonings, but which hit him in a particular way. He had, he realized, built the life that Thomas had been planning to build. The cattle operation, the property, the family, the Creek Bend pavilion, the sense of something deliberately and well constructed. He had built it alongside Anna, which meant he had built it better than he would have done alone, and he knew this not as a diminishment of his own contribution, but as the most important fact about how good things got made. They got made by people who chose each other and kept choosing, day after day, in the ordinary persistent way that was more durable than any single dramatic gesture. He told her this, because he told her everything, because 26 months of being careful with someone had given way to 7 years of telling her everything, and he did not know how to go back, and more to the point, had no interest in going back. Told her on the porch because the porch was where these things were told in the evening, with the spring sky going its colors and the children's voices diminishing toward quiet inside the house. "I think Thomas would have approved," she said. "I know he would have," Dexter said. "He had good judgment, except in certain matters." "What matters?" "He was going to go back for that lantern himself the next morning," Dexter said. "He mentioned it at supper. I told him I would handle it, and then I did not. He said it simply now, not without weight, but with the weight of something real and known rather than something catastrophic. That is what happened. I left the lantern. He went back." "I should have gone back." "Yes," she said, "just that. Not denying it, not cushioning it, because she was not that kind of woman and they were not that kind of marriage. And you carry that. But you are also still here, and you built the barn, and you went into the barn, and you named your son for him, and you built the thing at the creek that he wanted to build. That is how you answer a debt you cannot repay. You do not spend the rest of your life standing outside things. You go in." He looked at her in the evening light. "When did you become the wisest person I know?" "I think it was gradual," she said. "I came in with a reasonable head start, and the conditions here have been favorable." He laughed. She laughed. The children's voices inside the house had gone quiet, which meant they were asleep or deeply engrossed in something that would require supervision in the morning, and the Kansas spring night was warm and full of the smell of grass and the first-of-the-year sound of frogs from the creek. In the summer of 1887, Anna discovered she was pregnant a third time. She told Dexter in the kitchen in the morning, the same way she had told him the 2 times before, directly, watching his face. This time there was no stillness, no needing to find his footing. This time he simply crossed the kitchen and held her, and she leaned into him with the ease of a woman entirely at home in the arms she was in. The third pregnancy was the smoothest of the 3, Anna healthy and energetic throughout, Thomas deeply interested in the biological and logistical specifics of the situation. Clara rose declaring with great certainty that the baby would be a sister, and that she had already decided the name. The baby arrived in February of 1888, in the thick of a Kansas winter, on a night when the snow was coming hard, and the doctor got halfway out from Caldwell before Clara Hollis, who had simply arrived at the Monroe property when she saw the weather building, made it clear that she had delivered babies in worse circumstances than this, and everyone could stay calm. The baby was a boy. Clara Rose's certainty regarding gender proved incorrect, which she received with the equanimity of someone who had simply been offering a preference rather than a prediction. He was born at 3 in the morning with the snow outside and the lamplight inside, and Anna's voice, exhausted and entirely herself, saying, "He is perfect. Come and see." They named him James Reed Monroe Reed for Anna's family, a deliberate acknowledgement that this life was built from 2 places and 2 histories, and the meeting of them was the whole point. James grew into the quietest of the 3 children, observant and thoughtful in a way that had its own kind of force. He watched things carefully before deciding what he thought about them. He had Anna's auburn coloring and his own particular quality of stillness that the other two did not share. By 1890, the Monroe property was a genuine established operation. The cattle herd at a size that required 4 full-time hands and periodic seasonal help. The house expanded twice. The creek pavilion grown into an actual structure with walls and a proper roof that the family used through 3 seasons of the year. The rose bed flowering each June with the predictability of a kept promise. Dexter was 42. Anna was 37. Thomas was 9. Clara Rose was 7. James was 2. On a Saturday morning in June of 1890, Dexter walked to the barn, the rebuilt barn, Thomas's barn, the barn he had stood outside of for 2 years, and the barn he had been walking in and out of for 11 years now without ceremony, and found all 3 horses groomed and the tack in perfect order and Samuel Cross waiting for him with the morning's report. He listened to the report. He walked back out into the morning. Anna was in the yard with the rose bed, which was in full flower, and James was sitting near her in the grass pulling at it with the focused interest of a 2-year-old. And from inside the house, he could hear Thomas and Clara Rose engaged in some elaborate game that appeared to involve the furniture being moved. He stood in the June morning and looked at all of it. The barn stood at the eastern edge of the yard, solid and weathered now, no longer new pale but a proper working structure with history in it. The house had its additions. The second corral was visible past the first. The cattle were out in the morning pasture in the middle distance, and the cottonwoods by the creek were in their full summer green, visible from where he stood. Anna looked up from the rose bed, shading her eyes with one hand. "You look very serious for a Saturday," she called. "I am taking stock," he called back. She looked at him for a moment with that expression, the one that was knowing and warm and had been the signature of his mornings for 11 years. "And," she said, he walked across the yard to her. He crouched down next to James, who examined him with the grave attention of the very young before offering him a fistful of grass. "Thank you," Dexter told his youngest son seriously, taking the grass with appropriate gravity. James seemed satisfied with this. He turned back to investigating the ground. Dexter looked up at Anna, who was watching him with that sunlit expression, the rose bed brilliant behind her, the morning full of warmth and sound and the smell of summer in Kansas. "The stock is very good," he said. She smiled, the full smile, not the composed almost smile but the real one, the one she saved, the one he had spent years learning to draw out of her. She reached out and tucked the loose strand of hair behind her ear and said, "I think so too." He stood up and took her hand, and they stood together in the June morning on the property they had built, with their children's voices coming from inside the house and the cattle in the middle distance, and the barn in its proper place at the edge of the yard, no longer a threshold to stand at but simply a door to walk through, the way all doors eventually became once you had the right person to go first with you. Thomas Monroe would have approved. He had always preferred the practical to the ceremonial, the actually built to the perpetually planned. He would have been out here with them, offering opinions about the rose bed's placement, teaching his nephew something impractical and fascinating, standing in the barn he had designed without being remotely surprised that it was still standing because he had built things to last. He was here in the way that the people we love are always here once we stop trying to keep them at the distance of guilt and let them simply be what they are, the ones who shaped us, the ones we carry forward, the ones whose names we give to children who will carry them further still. The morning was bright, the summer was full, the life was everything. Anna squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. "Come on," she said. "Those children are doing something to the furniture." "They absolutely are," he said. They went inside.